Hi class, this is Professor Harmony Kim. This week, we will study the spread of Buddhism, especially spread of Theravada Buddhism. Therefore, let's look at the timeline of the development and decline of Buddhism in India. Let's briefly review this map. So Gautama Siddhartha Buddha, born and found Buddhism around this 563 to 483 BC. So around this time, the Buddha was born and found Buddhism. 326 BC, around this region, the great Alexander invaded India. So here's Alexander's invasion to India. Then Maurya Empire, governed by Chandragupta, established the India Empire around 322 BC. And the son of Chandragupta is Bindusara, and the son of King Bindusara was King Asoka. So King Asoka was grandson of Chandragupta. King Asoka spread Buddhism around the 3rd century BC. From the death of King Asoka, the next emperor is King Kanishka. Until King Kanishka, India was called Buddhist India, but this title became ceased to be so. When the Chinese pilgrim, whose name is Huaxiang, traveled in India in the early years of 4th AD, around this time, Huaxiang, this Chinese pilgrim, found Buddhism nearly everywhere in decay. Then the Hun, located north to the India, HUN, the Hun invade India and destroy monastery and suppressed Buddhism in the 6th century AD. 4th AD, Chinese pilgrim observed that Buddhism in decline, and in 6th century AD, Hun invaded India, and the 7th century AD, there is another Chinese pilgrim named Xuanzang traveled in India, and Xuanzang encountered many non-Buddhists in the early years of the 7th century. So during 700 up to 1200 AD, the Indian subcontinent was divided among numerous kingdoms throughout the first millennium until the formation of the Gupta Empire. Decline of Buddhism in the India was not a singular event. It was a centuries-long process. In the 11th and 12th century AD, which is not appear in this map, Muslims invade India, and this invasion virtually extinguished Buddhism in the Indian subcontinent and in Central Asia. This is the timeline, summary of a timeline. So you can read this slide and then go back to this map, and then you can match what's going on along the timeline. So Buddhism, here's Shakyamuni Buddha, born and found Buddhism, and then Buddhism flourished around King Asoka, and then the Buddhism slowly declined. There are several reasons why decline of Buddhism occur in India. There is some invasion by other tribes or competition with Hinduism and also invasion by Muslim. There are several factors to cause the decline of Buddhism in India. Let's look at the map of India along the timeline. The left map shows, this orange color, shows the region ruled by Chandragupta. And the first Indian empire was highly centralized and governed by an ideal of exercising power impartially. Right map shows Asoka Empire during 250 BC. A little bit expand from the Chandragupta's reign. Northeast area is a little bit expanded. Asoka's empire reached at its greatest extent of Buddhism. If you look at this black triangle post, indicate the site of Asoka's rock and pillar edicts. In other words, King Asoka spread Buddhism throughout India. King Asoka supported the construction of monasteries and missions to other countries. The Buddhist emperor Asoka promoted Buddhism and made Buddhism into a major religion in the Indian continent. Eventually, Buddhism died out in India. Missionaries King Ashoka sent actually brought its teachings throughout Asia, causing Buddhism to survive and becomes a modern major religion. I mentioned that King Ashoka supported the construction of a monastery. This is his first temple at Buddha Gaya named Sanchi. And left panel shows inside the Sanchi temple, and right panel shows the gate of Sanchi Stupa. So this part, the gate of Sanchi Stupa appears here in detail. Asoka communicated his policies throughout his realm by pillars that he ordered to be erected. And on the top of the pillar, the lion capital has been adopted as official national emblem. King Ashoka also sent missionaries across India to spread Buddhism, therefore paving the way for the spread of Buddhism into Asia. This upper panel showed the route of missionaries inside India. So the missionaries was sent from India to Sri Lanka. The lower panel showed the missionaries outside the India. So you can see here into China, even sometimes by sea it goes Southeast Asia. King Asoka's missionaries and their writings spread Buddhism throughout India and to East Asia and South Asia. Also, once Buddhism spread out of India, the form of Buddhism is called Mahayana Buddhism. So, how's the difference between Theravada Buddhism and Mahayana Buddhism? So, in the centuries following the Buddha's death, different viewpoints appear in the interpretation of his teachings. By the 1st century AD, two forms of Buddhism emerged. One is Theravada Buddhism, the other one is Mahayana Buddhism. Theravada Buddhism is the name given to the tradition that most closely follows the teachings and traditions established during the time of the Buddha and in the following centuries. It means teachings of the elders. Theravada Buddhism, sometimes called Southern Buddhism, because it is mainly practiced in Thailand, Cambodia, Burma, Laos, and Sri Lanka. Mahayana Buddhism, during the 1st century AD, as the teachings developed and spread, a form of Buddhism called Mahayana Buddhism emerged. Mahayana Buddhism means great beaker. In the Mahayana tradition, there is a belief in Bodhisattva. Bodhisattva is beings who are on the path to becoming Buddha, but Bodhisattva chose to delay their final release from rebirth out of compassion to help all creatures. Mahayana Buddhism that is practiced in China, Japan, and Korea, and Vietnam is often called Eastern Buddhism. Mahayana Buddhism that is mainly practiced in Tibet, Mongolia, Bhutan, parts of China, and the Himalayan regions of Nepal and India is often called Northern Buddhism. So, around the 1st century AD, the spread of Buddhism from northern India along the trade route taken by merchants, monks, and travelers accelerated rapidly. To the north and east, Buddhism was transmitted to growing energy by the merchant who play a vital role in linking China with the Indus Valley. There were traveling merchants from the heart of Central Asia, classic middlemen whose own close-knit network and efficient use of credit left them ideally positioned to dominate long-distance trade. So this Silk Road is international highway. Along the highway, Buddhism can be transmitted. Also, to the south, in the Deccan Plateau, squares of cave temples were built with stupas deep into the Indian subcontinent. Upon transmitting Buddhism from India into East Asia, how Buddhism came to disappear from India, how Buddhism came to decline from the land of its birth, India. Some scholars contended that Buddhism never disappeared but simply changed form or was absorbed into Hindu practices. Buddhism displaced as Turkish invasions destroy holy sites, temples. About 1,200 Muslim forces destroy library of Nalanda and thousands of monks exiled. By the 7th century, Buddhism was declining rapidly. Theravada Buddhism nearly disappeared, while Mahayana Buddhism was absorbed into Hinduism and Islam. An modified form of Theravada Buddhism, called Mahayana Buddhism became more popular in China, Korea, and Japan. Let's examine the transmission of Buddhism in the Chinese aspect. In doing so, we need to consider Chinese pilgrims who traveled India to introduce Buddhism into China. Around the 1st century CE, the spread of Buddhism from northern India along the trade routes taken by merchants, monks, and travelers accelerated rapidly. To the north and east, Buddhism was transmitted with growing energy by the Sogdian merchant who played a vital role in linking China with the Indus Valley. Indian scriptures had been translated into Chinese since the first centuries of the Common Era. Missionaries from India and Kashgaria, which is modern Xinjiang, Parthians from Iran, Sogdians from the area of Central Asian republics of the former Soviet Union, had founded monasteries in Luoyang and Chang'an, where individual monks and teams of monks were busily translating the vast Buddhist literature coming out of India. There were also many Chinese monks who had gone west, at least 44 clerics before Xuanzang. The first one in 260 CE had traveled westward, though not all of them reached the land of their faith, India. So some Chinese monks were successful to arrive at India. Most of them were not. Among those who had gone west, there were the Chinese pilgrims who traveled India. One of them is Faxiang. Faxiang went to the west in 339 CE around his age of 60. Amazing. It's a quite old age at the time. Faxiang traveled India and Sri Lanka maybe 10 years or more. The red arrows on the map indicate the travel route from China to India and the return path by sea route. So Faxiang returned to China via sea route from Sri Lanka, back to China. And during sea route, he stopped off somewhere in either Sumatra or Java. Once he returned, he spent the rest of his life recording his travels and translating the text he had brought back. I introduce Chinese pilgrim in chronicle order. So after Faxiang, the next Xuanzang is the most celebrated and influential of all the Chinese monks who traveled to India in search of the Dharma. He was born around 600 and started his journey in 629. After crossing the Taklamakan Desert and then the Pamir Mountains, he made his way to Kashmir, where he studied for 2 years before heading down to the Ganges plains and into the Buddhist heartland, India. He followed further studies at Nalanda University for some years and became a great teacher himself before going on pilgrimage around India. On return to Nalanda, he won a great debate and finally decided to return to China with his treasures of scriptures, relics, and sacred images. After many adventures and life-threatening incidences, he arrived back 16 years after leaving. He spent the rest of his life translating the text he had brought back. It took 16 years once he departed from China and returned to China from India. Xuanzang did not take sea route. Xuanzang followed the Silk Road. The red arrow indicates the route from China to India, and blue arrow indicates the route to return to China. So when he went to India, Xuanzang passed north rim of Taklamakan Desert, and when he returned to China, he took southern rim of Taklamakan Desert. Another Chinese pilgrim named Yijing. Yijing's works are very important for an understanding of the history of Buddhism and Buddhist sect, as he wrote extensively on his travel and the sect and practices he found not only in India but in the Malay archipelago also. He was an admirer of his predecessors, Fashang and Xuanzang, and Yijing decided in his mid-30s to travel to the famed monastery of Nalanda in India. On his way, he studied disciplines and Sanskrit in the monastery in Sumatra. Somewhere here, Sumatra. He also studied for around 7 years in Sumatra during his return journey. During this time, he made translation of the more than 400 texts he had collected on his travels. He even traveled to Guangzhou and back to Sumatra when he ran out of writing materials. So he went back and forth, Guangzhou and Sumatra. Yijing wrote books titled A Record of the Buddhist Religion as Practiced in India and the Malay Archipelago. His second book, Chinese Monks in India, biography of eminent monks who went to the Western world in search of the law, all the information he was able to gather about Chinese monks who had gone to India before and during his time. So far, we investigated spread of Buddhism throughout India toward East Asia and South Asia. What about spreading Buddhism from India to Ceylon, which is Sri Lanka? For more than half of its history, Theravada Buddhism has existed mainly in India and Ceylon. It is hard to disentangle Theravada history in India. Buddhism in India did not write its own history, so evidence survives only in Chinese and Tibetan translation. Ceylon has a tradition that is the Theravadic country. Archaeological and literary evidence proves that the Ceylonese historical account of Buddhism in the island, starting from Mahinda's mission and a mission sent by Tissa Moggaliputta to Suvarnabhumi. Of course, there have been Hindu invasions, most destructive in the 5th, 9th, 10th, 11th, and 13th centuries. This culminating in the establishment of the Hindu kingdom of Jaffna in the north of the island from the 13th to the 15th centuries. There are Muslim settlements, notably on the east coast, and there was massive interference from Christian colonial powers who ruled coastal areas from 1505 on and the whole island from 1815 to 1948. But despite all these alien intrusions, Theravada Buddhism has dominated the religious and cultural life of the country throughout its recorded history. This can be said to begin with the arrival of Mahinda in 250 BCE. In particular, for most of the period, virtually all Sinhalese have been Theravada Buddhist. The only numerically significant exception is the Roman Catholic community on the west coast. For the first millennium of the Common Era, insofar as Theravada Buddhism existed at all outside Ceylon, it left little trace. The Sinhalese means population in Sri Lanka is referred to as Sinhalese. The Sinhalese are well aware of their part in keeping this great religious tradition alive. The 19th century was a watershed in the history of Buddhism in Ceylon. In 1796, the British succeeded the Dutch as rulers of the maritime province, the Low Country. Low Country is the term which refers to the now comparatively populous and developed west and south of the island, with its capital at the port of Colombo. In 1815, they acquired control of Kandy. Kandy is the name of a city in the central highland which had been the capital of the Sinhalese kingdom since the 16th century. They thus acquired political control over the whole island, a control they were not to relinquish till 1948. During the 19th century, Buddhism began to change its character. By the end of the century, quiet, a new kind of Buddhism had taken definite shape and begun to spread from the middle classes in Colombo. In 1892, the Anglican Bishop of Colombo published a rather well-informed book about Buddhism. In that book, he wrote like this: "There are two Buddhisms now in Ceylon. One Buddhism is the residuum of the old Buddhism of the past centuries, as it lingers in out-of-the-way places, and as it has shaped the habits and ways of those who are not under European influence. And the other Buddhism is a new revival, much more self-conscious and artificial, which aims indeed only at reviving what Buddhism always professed to be, but which has been influenced in its estimate of that profession very largely by Europeans." This new kind of Buddhism has been brilliantly analyzed by modern scholars. Professor Bechert has called it Buddhist modernism. Professor Obisekers called Protestant Buddhism. For this movement in Theravada Buddhism, both originated as a protest against Christianity and itself reflects Protestantism. Its salient characteristic is the importance it assigns to the lady. To the creation of Protestant Buddhism, two kinds of influence have contributed. The primary credit must go to Protestant missionaries and to a handful of other Westerners influenced by them, anti-missionary missionaries, which is called the Theosophists. But their seed would not have fallen on fertile ground. In other words, the peace and prosperity of the 19th century has not brought about socio-economic changes. A new Chinese middle class of bureaucrats, businessmen, and professionals. Professionals include lawyers, doctors, school teachers, intellectuals. They arose centered on Colombo. The kind of religious individualism which had appealed to businessmen in Northwest Europe from the Reformation appealed to them too. When the Buddha first preached, the urban middle class seized the religious leadership. Buddhism, for the second time, began a Protestant Reformation. This time, it was based on another effect of British rule, such as the use of printing and hence the increase of reading. So we will examine Protestant Buddhism further in the next time. Quiz 1. Which of the following is not 10 propositions in the Second Council? Second Council is the turning point to initiate Mahayana Buddhism. I introduced 10 propositions in the past lecture, so you can find the answer from the past lecture or maybe other internet source. Question 2. Which of the following is not the reason for the decline of Buddhism in India? This question is more related to next week's lecture, and the answer is A. Christianity invasion. I will go over this question in next week. Okay, this is a routine process to submit assignment. So I already provide the answer to one of our quiz questions, so it's easy to complete assignment. You just send this assignment to my email address. Please write down code number BUD 413 and date February 28. And please use this main text body of email. Please do not make attachment file for weekly based announcement. Just write down your official last name, comma, followed by first name. And you just write down the answer of 2 quiz questions. The due of this assignment is March 6, Sunday, midnight. This is the end of lecture video.